we've been joined today by Sue Hoegberg, and I think many of you are familiar with her and with Dewberry. And Sue is going to talk to us today about the 3D Nation study results, and I'm very grateful you could join us. Thanks for making the time, Sue.
Well, sure. It's great to be here, and I think I'm joined by several of my co-conspirators on this study. I think Ashley Chappell, Allyson, Jason, and Carol Ostergren are all here, so I'm going to try and present. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And I'm going to just let, Ashley and Allyson start us off by just talking about, why we did this study and their perspective on how we're doing.
Did you want to go first, Ashley, or?
Sure. I didn't expect to go, but that's fine.
That's all right. Yeah, we talk about this enough. We should be able to do it.
I know we talk about this all the time. I think, for Arizona, I don't know how interested you are in coastal issues, but at NOAA, where we are interested in issues, one thing we're really interested in is elevation right at the coastal zone. And of course, as agencies, NOAA and USGS's areas of responsibility really overlap there, as well as a lot of other federal agencies in each one of the states that has this zone. So this 3D Nation study, the idea came along because USGS was wanting to update the NEA study, which you probably all are familiar with and maybe even participated in. And so at the same time, USGS wanted to update the NEA. We wanted to collect similar requirements in the near shore and offshore. And it just made sense for us to align and work over what turned out to be many years with you all at the state level and other federal agencies in collecting the requirements, the growth areas, the interest you all have in elevation data, not just at the coast, of course, right? We weren't limited to that, but what we have ended up with on this study, Sue is going to go into more detail, and especially how it relates to your state. But I think this 3D Nation study, I'm glad that we've done it to understand how those requirements dovetail, to understand how NOAA and USGS and all of you can work together to provide the elevation data we all need across the nation. And this study was particularly interesting. I'll just flag this last bullet, that we did it in a technology agnostic way. So we didn't ask people, do you think that airborne LiDAR will meet? We said, what are your needs? And so she's going to be talking about for what we acquired and what it can tell us. But overall, I think, the 3D Nation study, I think, is very, we want to keep going into the future. So Allyson and Sue, I don't know if that's what you wanted.
Good for me. I mean,
okay.
Okay, well, thanks. So just a few clarifications on the terminology that I'll be using. So we're talking 3D elevation data that's both topographic and bathymetric. And in the context here, bathymetric includes inland bathymetry for rivers, streams, and lakes. We asked the folks to talk about their programs in terms of their mission critical activities. And by that, we meant some sort of an activity that uses elevation data to include derivative products to accomplish a business use. And mission critical was defined as being, essential for their program delivery or their core mission. And a business use was a sort of a higher level category. So we asked folks to define their mission critical activity however they wanted to, but then to bin their mission critical activity in one of 30 business uses that we had predefined. So for those of you who participated in the study, I'm sure that you felt the pain of filling out our extremely complicated online questionnaire. But we were trying to be very comprehensive in what we were asking about. we all of the information that we asked about, we tied to the geographic extents of the mission critical activity. So we asked people to tell us, their specific area of interest geospatially, and then tell us what kinds of quality level or IHO order they needed, how frequently the data need to be updated, what kinds of errors were acceptable, both horizontal and vertical, in the coastal areas, how far up or down the beach profile they needed data, whether cross sections or transects could fulfill their needs, or if they needed a continuous surface of elevation data, what kinds of hydrologic processing of the elevation data they needed, whether they needed tide correction in those coastal areas, how seamless the data need to be, both within specific tiles of a single acquisition project and between acquisition projects, and that would include between, say, inland topography and the nearshore bathymetry. And if they needed seamless data, what kinds of manipulation of the data would be acceptable in order to make the data seamless. We also asked about what kinds of data products they need and how important it is to them for the elevation data to be integrated with other data sets. So those were the requirements. And then we asked about benefits, and we asked them to try to quantify their benefits in terms of dollars or hours, wherever possible, in 3 categories. 1, operational benefits. So that's basically accomplishing their program mission. Customer service benefits, and then societal benefits, including, environmental and public safety, but we did not ask anyone to try to quantify their societal benefits. So all of those requirements and benefits were tied to the geospatial areas of interest so we could stack them up and do some analysis. We did have, so for any mission critical activity, someone could say that they needed inland topography and inland bathymetry, or they needed all 4 of these types of data. We asked the specific characteristics about each of those types of data. So this is what we learned. We got responses from 45 federal agencies, all 50 states, 6 territories. That included 99 local governmental entities and 8 tribal governmental entities, 10 non-governmental organizations, 14 nationwide academic institutions, or academic institutions with nationwide areas of interest. There were more academic institutions if you included the ones that only had a state-specific area of interest, and 34 private companies. We had a total of 1,352 mission-critical activities across those 30 different business uses and all 4 of those geography types. And, on this map, you can see, the darker colors represent more areas of interest stacked up on top of each other. Specific to Arizona, this is what we learned about the inland topography requirements. And this is representative of 249 mission critical activities, which represents the state-specific responses plus any other responses that overlapped with Arizona. So in terms of quality level requirements, the largest number was quality level 2, but you can see that, from quality level 0 through quality level 1, so quality level 0 through quality level 1, about half the folks said they need something better than the currently provided quality level 2 that, the 3-DEP program is providing. And update frequency requirements, pretty much across the board, 4 to 5 years was the most frequent request across all of the categories that we asked about.
Mark Cristiano has a question.
Sure.
I was just curious, what is the difference between QL1 and QL1 looks like HD? Is that?
Yeah, high density or high definition. So it's the number of points per square meter.
So what is the difference between QL1, which would be, I'm assuming 8 points per square meter? What would the HD version?
I think it's
Greater than 20.
Oh, okay.
It was designed to allow people to indicate, preference for greater point densities that would be available from things like Geiger motor or single photon.
Gotcha. If you
And
have
I
a
think-
chart somewhere, I'd love to see that, because this is a problem we run into a lot.
I can get a link for that for
Yeah.
you and paste it in the chat. Yeah, I'll do that.
That would be great, because the basic QL0, QL1, QL2 just doesn't do enough to define what we're talking about. That'd be great. So,
I have to say these are not official USGS. As a USGS representative, official USGS, they haven't been put into the spec, and we don't know if they're going to. But we created the table to help aid people telling us what their needs were. So just FYI.
yeah, I think it's a great, just informal way of defining stuff. So,
Okay, any other questions on inland topo requirements? All right, so there were some responses for inland bathymetry for Arizona. So there were 130 mission critical activities that said they needed inland bathymetry somewhere in Arizona. The quality level requirements are a little bit different for bathymetry than they are for LiDAR, but sort of a similar nomenclature. And here we had the highest, well, so it was kind of evenly split between quality level 0B and quality level 1B in terms of quality level requirements. And again, update frequency 4 to 5 years was the most frequently requested. One of the other things that we asked folks to do was to rank the importance of update frequency versus vertical accuracy versus geographic coverage. And I would say, I think we were all a little bit surprised at the response we got, which indicated that update frequency was the most important. I think most of us thought that vertical accuracy or geographic coverage, but probably vertical accuracy was going to be the most important. But that was the second most important. These are the top 10 business uses that were listed for the mission critical activities across Arizona, flood risk management being the number one, then infrastructure and construction management, natural resources conservation, homeland security and disaster response, water supply and quality, and can sort of see the full list there. I think this is pretty much the same top 10 across the nation. I don't think Arizona was particularly unique in terms of what ones were listed. In terms of the dollar benefits that we collected, it was a total of $13.5 billion were reported. And 10 billion of that came from inland topography, almost $1 billion from inland bathymetry, $2.5 billion from nearshore bathymetry. And, we're pretty sure that offshore bathymetry is underrepresented at, less than $250 million. And the states had the most mission critical activities and the most dollar benefits reported. This is how the dollar benefits look across Arizona for inland topography on a per square mile basis. You've got, this concentration down here in the southwest. And this is the same 249 mission critical activities that are contributing to these dollar benefits. And for inland bathymetry, the same 130 mission critical activities with pretty much the same concentrations in those same areas. You can see that it's the same geographic areas that have the higher values. One thing that we do think is that the dollar benefits are pretty likely that they were underestimated for a number of reasons. We think that respondents were hesitant to estimate benefits from data that they don't use on a day-to-day basis. We know that the 3-depth data are better understood than bathymetry, and as I said, the offshore bathymetry benefits are pretty clearly underestimated, and there's just not as much usage of those data by the folks who responded to our questionnaire. We also know that we are likely missing input from a lot of small private firms and individual users. We really were focusing on governmental entities and larger private companies, and we weren't really trying to reach out to the mom and pop engineering companies throughout the United States, but they certainly have a need and realize benefits from publicly available elevation data. And we were disappointed that we didn't get more responses and dollar benefits from some key industries that we think should be realizing some significant dollar benefits. We didn't get anyone from precision agriculture to respond. I don't think we had anybody from commercial timber either. Mining was somewhat underrepresented. Oil and gas industry was underrepresented. We did get a response from a motor vehicle manufacturer who's looking into, electric vehicles and where to place charging stations and autonomous driving, but they didn't provide dollar benefits. Offshore shipping, boating, fishing, cruise lines, port and harbor managers, they were also underrepresented. But pardon me?
Sorry to cut in, Sue.
No, that's fine.
Was the Army Corps included in that survey?
Yes.
Okay, they were.
Yeah. And they provided a lot of mission critical activities.
Yeah, I would expect so. I would think that their benefit would have boosted that dollar estimate quite a bit. But.
Well, yeah, I think this is Ashley. I mean, the big gaps were in the private sector, as Sue just ran through. But, to be honest, on both the state and the federal agency side, when we talk about benefits, because we're really working for the taxpayer, a lot of our agencies find it hard to calculate benefits.
Yeah.
Because we don't put a number on what we do oftentimes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm surprised that timber didn't weigh in more either. What we've worked on with ForFry and the private industry for timber, LiDAR is critical. I mean, you can tell so much about a forest and a timber stand using LiDAR data that it's insane. That I mean, there's billions right there just in the commercial timber operations for LiDAR acquisition.
And notably, they're the folks who also need the higher density, the higher point density.
Yeah.
So using all of those stacked up requirements and stacked up benefits, we also have been doing some work on generating some geospatial benefit cost analyses. We overlaid all of our study area with a 1 kilometer grid, and then, calculated all the requirements, all the benefits and the costs for each grid cell, and aggregated all of that information into a ginormous geodatabase. We had acquisition cost information it was derived from information provided by the government. And then we used a methodology that we called reduced value multipliers. So and I'll try and explain that. If someone said they needed quality level 1 data updated annually, and if they got that, they would get $1 million in benefits. But the program scenario that we're analyzing is only giving them quality level 2 data updated every 4 to 5 years. We said, okay, well, that $1 million in benefits that value is reduced because we're not giving them everything that they're asking for. So we applied that to the information that we received and ran scenarios for all of the combinations of quality level and update frequency for which we had cost information. And then we did some other mixed quality level and update frequency combinations. And we're still kind of sorting through all of that information and trying to make some good use of that information. So the, oh shoot, there should be 2 links here. Darn, I'm sorry about that. So the study report has been published. It was published in September. It is a whopping 14,000 pages long. And as I mentioned, we're, USGS and NOAA are looking at all of the data that we've been collecting and analyzing and trying to, make some assessments about where they want to go with their program directions using all that information. Allyson or Ashley, did you want to say anything else about what's next?
Probably the biggest area of interest for folks is what's going to happen next in Arizona anyways, on the 3DIP side of the house. So just to say, we do intend to, share more information in the future about the decisions. Right now, as Sue mentioned, we're trying to understand how this information that we're getting from the study is going to turn into a program. We have some ideas, a lot of good ones related to being potentially a little bit more flexible in how we define what counts in the program. Maybe some increased update frequencies, like 4 to 5 years instead of 8. It gets a little more complicated for us. Like Ashley mentioned, we're a government agency. We have taxpayers that we basically answer to via metrics Congress asks us about. So we need to make sure the program is something that we can measure, because if we can't show success in the program, they're not going to give us more money to do these things. So there's some stuff like that we have to work out, but there's great minds thinking about these things, and I can't wait to give Drew the go ahead to share a lot more information about what we're thinking, and hopefully in maybe a couple months we'll be somewhere with that. And then USGS intends to create like a fact sheet or a few page document to explain where we're thinking we're going with next generation 3DIP.
And I guess one other thing that we would love to hear from you all is, how do you think you might want to use the information from the study, and how would, is there anything that these data could help you in terms of strategic planning or focus areas for your funding requests?
I can probably speak to that a little bit, Sue. I think it always helps us to be able to clearly articulate where the value is when we're speaking to our executives, and how much return on investment if they allot for more investment, right? So it always helps us to have a pretty clear definition of, if you invest in this many miles of LiDAR, even as a refresh, we're going to save this much as a state. It's worthwhile for us to look at that. It helps me in my arguments with my own agency. I think it helps others in theirs, as simple as we can make it, because as soon as we get complicated, then I lose them.
Right.
Yeah. Anybody else? You're welcome to come off mute and share some information with Sue. I think it helps them in how they display the data, how we visualize the data. I think that's really important. I know a lot of you really contributed to this study, and so USGS is really hoping that we can give feedback too, and get more out of it. I think that's the idea, right?
Yeah, and I'll just mention that NOAA is working on a story map and a hub site, and I think USGS is also hoping to be able to do something like that as well. So, more visualizations,
right,
I think are coming.
That's excellent news. Very good. Mark, your hand is up.
First, thank you for the presentation. It was
Yes.
really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I saw a number of things jump out at me, especially since timber wasn't in there. When you go to the U.S. map and you look at Georgia, for example, its color was sort of like a yellowish color, which clearly indicates timber is not in there because Georgia is a massive timber producer, kind of thing. But the thing that struck me is what you just said about if there's a possibility of lowering the refresh cycle assistance, that would be huge for us. One of the barriers we have on the 𝐀𝐫𝐈� is my fire program wants to see LiDAR every 5 years because that's the rate we're changing the forest at. Between timber and fire operations, we want to see that refresh rate. But I can't ask USGS for help because you guys have an 8-year requirement. You can get me LiDAR data if I show up with cash. You won't match my dollars at all. Now this year we worked it out because the Tonto and the 𝐀𝐫𝐢𝐳𝐶 and the Prescott all needed assistance, and so my dollars were you guys are able to match and fill in a lot of the map. But we need a 5-year or better return cycle, and we'd love some assistance with that from USGS. So if the refresh barrier dropped to like a 5-year or a 4-year cycle, that would really entice I know like the Forest Service to maybe participate more.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think that's one of the things. I do apologize. I'm on the East Coast, and so is Sue. But I'm gonna take one and be like, it's 5:30, so just bear with me for a few moments. Inversely proportional quality of my speaking, the later it gets. But I think that's part of the reason we have to figure out how does that work from a metric and tracking point of view. Like one of the ways we've thought about it is, great, we lower that threshold and we say you're eligible, you get more, it's not that you're eligible, you just get more points on your proposal if you meet the criteria in the BAA, right? So if we can lower that threshold for, okay, you have data there that's 4 years old or 5 years old, you'll get more points. If you come again 2 years later and 2 years after that, and we go with you each time, then who's not getting data? Who's now got 8 and 10-year-old data? So what's one of the things we have to figure out is how are we going to manage that part of the process so that we don't create haves and have-nots just because someone has, I mean, I'm glad you have money. I'd love for you guys to come partner with it, but certain areas end up getting a lot more, and especially in the West, we see a very different dynamic between how the federal agencies are more decentralized, different things that happen, tax bases, all those things, and we don't want to have any people left behind. So it's one of the things we're trying to work out is how can we set some criteria that won't create that kind of situation while also enabling these better refresh things for people. So I can tell you that the current, it changes, not every day, but it changes. But the current thinking is we're hoping to see if we can make a QL1 or better and a update frequency of 4 to 5 year program work.
Yeah, and I think that would be amazing. And I think the other thing that we in the Forest Service and probably in other agencies are having to fight against is a lot of managers are like, well, we've got LiDAR data, we're done. We paid for it, and then suddenly you look at a LiDAR data set and you realize time has drifted by. Like the 4FRI, which is one of our most important projects in the country, is now dealing with 10-year-old data. And the managers haven't picked up yet that, hey, we should be thinking about the refresh cycle. So I think that's something else we're fighting against, which was probably an argument back when we were first starting to acquire NAEP imagery. We did that. Why do I have to do it again? Well, the world changed and we have to go reacquire. And so I think getting everybody on board with the idea that LiDAR is not a one and done, but is something similar to imagery where we need to keep going back kind of thing and finding a sustainable model for that is another major challenge I get argued with all the time. Why are you getting more LiDAR data?
Yeah, and I think that's what the chart that Sue was showing, like that's how I interpret that chart. People want it more often. Because once you, what I think we're like, sorry, this is like a terrible analogy, but I was thinking of us as like drug dealers. Like we hooked you on the first LiDAR data set. You changed all your business processes. And so now that you're ready for your next hit of LiDAR data because you have your business processes established.
Yeah.
Places where you haven't changed your business processes, you can wait, but where you have, you need it when you need it. I think the other thing we kind of fight with, and I think it's very important for folks in the West, impressions, right? I've been a liaison, I've been a Drew Decker in the East Coast and in the West Coast, and it's very difficult for folks in the East Coast to imagine the desert isn't actually flat and sagebrush, and they're just like, oh, just do for structure for motion for all that part of the country. It's like, yeah, no. Or when people say just use the NAPE on the East Coast, yeah, no. So I think that's one of the things we fight as well is I promise you, I hold this banner, and I've held it since the NEA study, that, you know, how difficult it is to map sagebrush without QL1 data. So, you know, trying to get that stuff straight and reminded of people. It's just so easy to fall on what do we call them, heuristics, you know, like little decision-making tools in our heads, and kind of remembering too the importance of that point cloud. It's really easy also for people to fall into it's bare earth. Like how much can it possibly change? And people start talking about these change programs with that in mind, and they're not thinking about the point cloud and what it provides and all the change that happens in the point cloud. So those are some of the things that we have to keep, you know, bringing up and reminding people. But it's like the blessing and the curse of how we set up our metric. As the person responsible for tracking the 89.5% of the nation we have complete, there was so much power in trying to reach 100% for the nation and getting data, but how do we translate that into something that people get behind? People love thermometers, right? Like we're hitting our pledge goal, like all that stuff people love to see. It's a great story to tell. So how do we tell a similar story when we have such a variable set of update stuff? So that's why I have a hard job, and luckily I don't have to do it alone. But yeah, I mean, this is great, guys. Thank you so much for all these comments.
Yeah. Robert, you had your hand raised.
Momentarily, the only comment I had was, you know, with the frequency rate in the desert Southwest, and somebody brought up the mom and pop engineering firms. In a large way, I think those mom and pop engineering firms are represented by flood control agencies, because that's who they work for a lot. And if you ask a flood control agency, they'll tell you they want a new LiDAR set every storm in the Southwest, because it is very important, those minor changes that you just mentioned, Allyson. So it's that kind of a tension between 100% coverage, which everybody wants, and immediate coverage all the time, which, you know, any flood control district out here wants and needs. So that was my own.
You're making me think of that being an analogy to coastal environment, and in the change that happens in the near shore environment. Every storm, I've been a boater, and it changes with just a blow sometimes, and so it's interesting. I'm trying to think, how do we bring that back in? I'm going to have a conversation with my boss about some of this, and we just had a conversation yesterday actually about next generation 3DEP and how to track some of it. So one of the things that we haven't shared very widely, it's just a beginning thought. Some people may have heard it in a presentation or two, but the idea of something that they're calling the 3DEP ecosystem. So I'm trying to think how to describe it. I don't normally have to talk about this, so I don't have a good short elevator speech for you, but it's kind of like that, you know, maybe we can't bring money to every one of the projects, but we can bring the power of connecting people and connecting data sets. And how can we build an ecosystem, with some air quotes, that helps people, you know, find data and have data with some standards and things that can feed together, so that if you do have to go it alone and go collect some data somewhere, you have a place to put it without it having to be necessarily considered a 3DEP data set or have to go through all the 3DEP stuff, but it makes it a lot more digestible for people and findable for people. And I don't know if you guys know Jason Stoker, but he's very into like, how can we enable better big data for folks? And so he's the one responsible for starting to vision and research this idea. So he's pretty excited about where that might go. But all this stuff is in like that early vision stage where it's like, that's all we got. Can't tell you too much more, but hopefully we can share more in the future.
That's exciting. I want to hear as it evolves, because I think those arguments help us, right? At the state, we are still so busy trying to get statewide LiDAR that nobody's even thinking about refresh. I can't even have that conversation yet. And
yeah,
that's a really important thing. And trying to prepare leadership for, no, we need more investment is tough.
That was part of our conversation yesterday. I think I floored some people when I said, well, you guys realize next generation 3DEP is next generation 3D-HP, right?
Right.
And so whatever we're establishing today is going to be what becomes the thing that, because right now 3D-HP is going to be built on the baseline of 3DEP. So then whatever we decide becomes the next baseline, and we need to make sure we check in with those hydro folks, like, does this make sense? Does this work? So that's part of the reason why you may or may not have heard us talk about our vision for a 3D national topography model. So keeping all these things connected. So when Sue, I love Sue, she's one of my best friends, comes and speaks to you about 3D-HP, I look forward to you guys giving her a whole heck of a lot of good feedback to help bring that to us as well.
Yeah, this community is good for that. We're pretty vocal. So
yeah, and I'm very proud of like that. I'm just going to sit here and be silent because I feel like I have to do that on a lot of my meetings. So that's awesome. Glad people stepped up. That's awesome.
Well, thank you, Sue. I really, really appreciate your time and your insights and your willingness to join us and drag your friends along. That's excellent. I really appreciate it.